Welcome back to Viewpoint. I'm James Zogby. My next guest is Glenn Kessler, veteran diplomatic correspondent and staff writer for the Washington Post. In a career of nearly 3 decades, he's covered the White House, Congress, and the State Department. He's covered politics and been the recipient of 2 shared Pulitzer Prizes. Currently writes the Washington Post's Fact Checker column, where he examines the accuracy of statement by politicians and diplomats in search of the truth behind the rhetoric. That's got to be a fun job.
It is. It is. I spend most of my day making people very mad at me.
Well, I mean, because the last time you were on the show, we talked about your book, and we talked about foreign policy issues, but now something entirely different. Was it a difficult transition for you?
No, I mean, you gave my little bio there. I mean, I've covered just about every building in Washington. So, and I was at one point the chief economic correspondent for the Washington Post. I write about budget policy. I write about foreign policy still, though not quite as often as I do when I
For those
write about
of you
politics.
who aren't from Washington, when you see the logo that's on the plasma screen here, the Pinocchio, if you look up in the Washington Post, the Fact Checker column, just go to it online and check it out. Some scathing reviews of what politicians say. Now, the thing that intrigues me is you do this regularly. Have you made a change? I mean, or do they keep using the same lies over and over again?
I think, I like to think that I make a difference. I do notice occasionally if I will call a politician out that they'll change their language. They'll tweak it a bit, do things to make it a little more accurate. And I guess we should say for your viewers that I rate people according to how bad the statement is. So the worst you can get is 4 Pinocchios. Something that's somewhat a minor transgression would be 1 Pinocchio, and then there's 2 and 3 in between. So 4 Pinocchios is pretty bad, and when people get 4 Pinocchios, sometimes they change, sometimes they don't.
Let's take a look at something that's a little off target, but it's on the same thing. Before again, I got a whole bunch of ones that some of my favorites that I wanted to get into, and that's the Herman Cain situation right now. He's heading for some Pinocchios with this changing story. We've seen this in every presidential cycle. I mean, guys get buried with a story that they didn't quite get right the first time, and the second time creates a feeding frenzy. And for the last 3 days, not only he has done nothing but talk about this, but pretty much every one of his opponents. I was reading Hotline today, and almost every one of his opponents have had to do nothing but answer questions about what do they say about Herman Cain. Is this going to be over? Does he get out of this situation, or does it bury him?
Well, I mean, I think you're right. He hasn't handled it very well. He's kind of let the story go on because his story keeps changing. And what you have is a situation where he said he didn't remember these instances, and then he did remember them, and he remembered them one way, and there's another way. And the more that continues, the more it will keep going. Ultimately, it's up to the voters who are going to vote in those primary states as to whether it makes a difference to them.
The only guy I ever knew who got out of one of these was Bill Clinton with Paula Jones and Jennifer Flowers. I mean, he went on, that was before the primary, he went on to overcome them all. Well, and later got buried by one of his later mishaps. Let me get to the first one if we could. This is a David Axelrod one. It's an exaggeration about jobs. Let's play it and then tell me how you rated it and why.
Well, there are larger things that we can do. Obviously, the American Jobs Act, all economists agree, would have a market effect on economic growth and would create millions of jobs.
Yeah, I gave him 2 Pinocchios for that. And the problem there was that he said all economists said it would create millions of jobs. I looked at the estimates of 30 different economists. There were maybe 9 that got above 1 million over 2 years. There were other economists that said 0 jobs would be created. So that's an example of where someone just gets so caught up in their spin that they say something that is, as I put it, he was batting 300 there.
Let me go to Biden. This was a big one, and it became a huge story, actually, for the vice president. In Flint, Michigan, Joe Biden talking about the impact of the economy and of the jobs bill, the money that they want to put into the economy to bring back police, et cetera, and what impact it's having on people in Flint, Michigan.
Let's look at the facts. In 2008, when Flint had 265 sworn officers on the police force, there were 35 murders and 91 rapes in this city. In 2010, when Flint had only 144 police officers, the murder rate climbed to 65, and rapes, just to pick two categories, climbed to 229. In 2011, you now only have 125 shields. God only knows what the numbers will be this year for Flint if we don't rectify it.
I heard that when he gave that press conference. I said, wow, what a compelling argument to make. But again, Glenn Kessler said something else.
Right, I gave that 4 Pinocchios. I mean, I think the vice president really stepped over the line on that one. Part of the problem was his numbers were off. In particular, his numbers on rapes, which was a situation where someone was comparing apples to oranges. The first number, 91 rapes, that was the number of rapes reported to the FBI, a particular kind of category. The other number was actually a broader number involving all sexual assaults, including things that the FBI does not define formally as rape, but of course it's horrible, but it's a sexual assault. And if you just compared apples to apples, the actual things that the FBI lists as a rape, the number of rapes actually went down, even though the number of police supposedly
Where do you get numbers like that?
Well, they got it from Flint, Michigan, from the Flint police, I guess it was the Flint mayor's office. But, you know, the problem was that the vice president or his staff, first of all, they should have known there was something fishy about those numbers. And you could have easily just gone on the web, which is the first thing I did, go look at the FBI database and find out what the facts were. And just on top of that, the other problem was he then made a link between decreasing police and increasing crime, which, you know, I looked at a lot of academic studies. It's tough to find that link, and in fact, the Flint police chief himself had said repeatedly he didn't think there was a link, that actually crime was higher when they had fewer officers.
And here's Rick Perry talking about jobs and countries that hate us and importing oil. Let's take a look at this one.
As president, I'll create at least 2.5 million new jobs, and I know something about that. In Texas, we created over 1 million new jobs, while the rest of the nation lost over 2 million. I'll start by opening American oil and gas fields. I'll eliminate President Obama's regulations that hurt other sources of domestic energy, like coal and natural gas. That'll create jobs and reduce our reliance on oil from countries that hate America.
How many Pinocchios?
He got 3 for that.
Okay. What were the principal offenders?
Well, the countries that hate us, I mean, you look at the statistics.
I got them up. Canada, Mexico.
Yeah, Mexico. Yeah. Yes, you know, that's Canada and Mexico account for a large part of it. Saudi Arabia, that is indeed a country that actually is a key U.S. ally. You go down the list. I mean,
first country that hates us is Venezuela on the list.
Yeah, maybe. There's Hugo Chavez, though he loves to sell oil to the United States.
And actually was given a whole lot of free oil to the Kennedys for their New England program.
Right, right.
I'm going to skip over. We've got a Herman Cain one next. I'm going to skip over it because I want to do somebody that actually did the job for you, and that's John Huntsman. His ad on Mitt Romney, doing a Mitt Romney flip-flop ad. It's kind of clever, and I like it. I want you to evaluate it. You haven't done an article on it yet, but I want you to take a look at it. Here is an ad by Huntsman against Romney.
If Republicans didn't like Mitt Romney's position on the so-called union-busting proposal in Ohio, all they had to do is wait one day before he changed it.
History has shown us over the last few decades in this 24/7 media world, the flip-flopping candidate cannot get elected.
I believe that abortion should be safe and legal in this country.
That I have consistently been pro-life.
When he took office, the economy was in recession, and he made it worse.
I didn't say that things are worse.
Look, I was an independent during the time of Reagan-Bush. I'm not trying to return to Reagan-Bush.
Is to pursue the strategy which Ronald Reagan pursued.
We do have tough gun laws in Massachusetts. I support them.
And I would protect our Second Amendment rights to bear arms.
And the core of their concern is what you've just raised. What is his core?
It smacks a little bit of leading from behind. This is a time when if you're going to be president of the United States, you show a little presidential leadership. That's by taking a position and leading out. Sometimes there's a risk associated with taking a position, but that's all part of leadership.
I always wondered what was more unbelievable, that Mitt Romney was a conservative or that conservatives believed he was a conservative. This one's going right to it. What do you think of that ad?
That is a very effective ad, and the reason it is effective is it takes Romney's own words. And I mean, that's actually the first time I've seen that ad. From studying various Romney statements, I think most of those are pretty accurate. They're not taken out of context. They're not ones that, because that's what you have to be really careful with a lot of these ads, where they'll take a snippet out of context. But the fact is, Romney's positions on many of those issues, particularly social issues, have shifted from when he was governor of Massachusetts to today.
One last one, and this is Paul Ryan on job regulations. We actually have a board on that. We're going to read it. We don't have the quote. This is, you have 219 new regulations coming out, costing over $100 million each. You gave him 3 Pinocchios.
That's right. And I had previously given the House Speaker, John Boehner, the same number of Pinocchios for a very similar statement. And this is an instance of where they pointed to a study, but when I dug into what that study showed, it turns out the number was really exaggerated. A lot of these, well, first of all, they looked at regulations that had $100 million of economic impact. That could be costs, it could be benefits. They just assumed everything was a cost. Secondly, a lot of these regulations were ones that were pending for years. They weren't going to come out in the next year, but there had been something that had been on the books, and the agencies had never gotten around it. And what they had looked at was a kind of regulatory wish list. And actually, the woman that had done the original study that they had cited, she redid her study after my article appeared.
I want to thank you so much for what you do, because in a campaign cycle like this one, we are being led by the nose with ads that sort of make claims, and politicians that say things because they sound good and actually sound convincing. But if it weren't for the Glenn Kesslers of the world, I think we'd all be lost sometimes in the maze of the lies. You poke holes in them for us all, and I want to thank you for what you do.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's all the time we've got. After 19 years, more than half of them here at Abu Dhabi TV, I'm sorry to say this might be the last show. It's been an incredible opportunity I've been given to be with you every week, and a rewarding experience as well. We've hosted heads of state, we've hosted cabinet members from across the globe, dozens of members of Congress, and some remarkable individuals. Rafiq Hariri was here, Yasser Arafat, Imran Khan, who actually caused all the women in the office to swoon. Queen Noor was here, Ron Brown, Jimmy Carter, Al Gore, and more. We were able to bring together a dialogue with students from here in the United States, with students at the University of Baghdad. We did one of those 1 week before the bombs began to fall in Iraq. We continued this incredible discussion 2 months after. And then we brought back some of the very same kids 4 years later to reassess the war and its impact. And then there were your calls. Every week, calls from every continent on the globe. They were often compelling and sometimes provocative. I remember the time when our guest was a State Department official who was asserting reports that U.S. bombing raids in Fallujah were untrue, that they weren't happening. And we took our first call, and it came from Fallujah. She contested the claim, and she held her phone up so that we could hear the bombs in the background. Or when in the mid-90s, when Arab Americans were being plagued by subjective profiling at airports, and we did 2 shows with an official working with Vice President Gore in charge of airline civil rights concerns. 24 of you called with complaints so compelling and troubling. The official asked us to submit your complaints as affidavits to his commission, and in the end, the policy was changed. Well, that was then, and this is now. And as I said at the opening, this might be our last show. Don't know for sure, but if it is, I want to take the opportunity to say thank you to Abu Dhabi TV for their support, and to Link TV and to MHZ for bringing us to audiences all across the U.S. I want to thank our local partners as well, and a special thanks to the crew here at the AP Studios and to Deborah Ackel, our extraordinary producer. I have the fun job, but it's Deborah and the crew who make all this work every week. We might be back next week, but if we're not, please stay in touch. You can email me. My email's on the screen. It's jzogby@aaiusa.org. You can follow us on Twitter at AAIUSA, Or you can see all of the back shows on our website at aaiusa.org. Thanks for watching, and stay in touch.